I met Timothy at this little coffee shop downtown in 2013 when I was 22 and working as a barista. He was 29, this quiet engineer who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for the same order: medium dark roast, no cream, no sugar. Most customers barely looked at me, just grabbed their drinks and rushed off to whatever important business they had. But Timothy actually asked how my day was going. Not in that fake customer service way, but like he genuinely wanted to know. He had this steady presence about him that I found incredibly attractive after dating all these immature guys my age who couldn't hold down jobs or commit to anything longer than a Netflix series. Timothy was different. He owned his own place, drove a reliable car that he actually maintained instead of letting fall apart. And when he said he'd call, he called. Revolutionary concept. Right. When he finally asked me out after weeks of these little coffee shop conversations, he took me to this nice Italian restaurant. Not some chain place, but an actual family-owned spot with real cloth napkins. He paid without making a big deal about it. Held doors open. Asked questions about my classes at community college. I remember thinking this was what dating an actual adult felt like. We started spending more and more time together, and Timothy was incredibly generous without being weird about it. When my car broke down 3 months into dating, he didn't just offer to look at it. He spent his entire Saturday under the hood, came back the next weekend with new parts he'd bought, and had me running again without accepting a penny. When I mentioned wanting to take a photography class but not being able to afford it, I found an envelope with the registration fee on my kitchen counter the next week. After about 1.5 years, Timothy suggested I move in with him. His house was this adorable little 2-bedroom place with an actual backyard and a kitchen that didn't share a wall with someone else's bathroom. Coming from my studio apartment where I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms, it felt like moving into a mansion. He cleared out closet space for me without being asked, bought groceries I actually liked, and never made me feel like I was imposing on his space. The proposal came in 2015 and nothing flashy or public, just the two of us on his couch watching some documentary about ocean life. He muted the television during a commercial, pulled out this simple but beautiful ring, and said he couldn't imagine his life without me in it. No pressure, no timeline, just this quiet certainty that we belonged together. We got married the following summer in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. For our wedding gift to ourselves, Timothy surprised me with a Toyota Camry, not used, not leased. He'd gone to the dealership and bought it outright. Had it detailed and waiting in the driveway with a bow on the windshield when we got back from our honeymoon. Every married woman should have reliable transportation, he said, handing me the keys like it was no big deal. The car was worth more than I'd made in 6 months at the coffee shop. Those first few years of marriage were comfortable in ways I'd never experienced. Timothy handled all the big stuff: mortgage payments, insurance, car maintenance, taxes, without ever making me feel stupid or left out. He'd explain things if I asked, but never in that condescending way some men do when they think they're teaching you something obvious. Bills got paid on time. The house stayed in good repair. And I never had to worry about whether we could afford groceries or if the lights were going to get shut off. But somewhere around 2020, that comfort started feeling more like a trap. Timothy had these routines that never changed. Coffee at 6:30, work by 7:15, home by 5:45, dinner at 6:30, asleep by 10. He'd spend weekends organizing his coin collection or reading technical manuals for work, occasionally suggesting we watch a movie I'd already seen 3 times. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't controlling or demanding. If anything, he was almost too accommodating, always asking what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I wanted for dinner. The problem was that I was starting to realize I wanted more than just comfortable. I was 27 years old, and my most exciting conversation topics revolved around what we were having for dinner and whether we needed to run the dishwasher. Timothy never surprised me anymore, never suggested anything spontaneous. Never seemed to have strong opinions about anything that wasn't work-related. When I'd try to start conversations about dreams or goals or places we might want to travel, he'd nod along politely but never really engage. Our physical relationship had basically flatlined too. We hadn't had sex in months, and Timothy didn't seem particularly bothered by it. When I'd try to initiate something, he'd respond but without any real enthusiasm, like he was checking an item off his to-do list. Afterward, he'd roll over and be asleep within minutes while I lay there wondering if this was really what the rest of my life was going to look like. That's when Tanner started at my office. I'd gotten a job at a marketing firm after finishing my associate degree. Nothing glamorous but decent pay and normal hours. Tanner was this charming, outgoing guy from California who'd moved here for work. And he brought this energy that made everyone around him seem more interesting. He had stories about places he'd lived and adventures he'd had, plans for things he wanted to do. During lunch breaks, he'd suggest trying new restaurants or checking out art galleries downtown, things that would never occur to Timothy in a million years. Tanner noticed things about me that my own husband had stopped seeing. When I got my hair cut, when I wore something new, when I'd had a particularly good or bad day, he'd ask follow-up questions about stories I'd told him, remember details about my family and friends, make jokes that actually made me laugh instead of just smile, politely. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was actually paying attention to me as a person, instead of just accepting my presence. It started with texting. Tanner would send me funny memes during the day, ask how meetings went, share random thoughts about coworkers or weekend plans. Nothing inappropriate at first. Just the kind of conversation I realized I'd been craving. When Timothy would spend entire evenings absorbed in his laptop or organizing his stupid coins, I'd be exchanging messages with someone who actually wanted to hear what I had to say. The lunch breaks became a regular thing. Instead of eating sad desk salads, Tanner and I would explore different places around downtown, trying ethnic food Timothy would never consider or checking out little shops I'd never noticed. He'd ask about my photography hobby, encourage me to bring my camera along, actually look at the pictures I took. Instead of just nodding and saying nice like Timothy did, I started looking forward to work in ways that had nothing to do with my actual job. Getting dressed became more interesting when I knew someone would notice the effort. Mondays weren't depressing anymore because they meant seeing Tanner again. I'd catch myself smiling at my phone when he texted, feeling this little flutter of excitement that I hadn't experienced since the early days with Timothy. The flirting escalated gradually. Compliments that lasted a little too long. Conversations that ventured into more personal territory. Moments when we'd be standing close enough that I could smell his cologne. Tanner had this way of looking at me that made me feel attractive and interesting again, like I was worth pursuing instead of just someone who happened to be there. When he suggested we grab drinks after work one Friday, I knew exactly what line we were about to cross. Timothy was working late on some project and wouldn't be home until after 8, which gave me plenty of time for what I told myself would just be one drink between friends. But sitting across from Tanner at this dimly lit wine bar, laughing at his stories and feeling his foot brush against mine under the table, I realized I didn't want it to be just one drink. We ended up talking for 3 hours about dreams and frustrations and all the things I couldn't discuss with Timothy because he'd just give me practical solutions instead of understanding that sometimes I needed someone to listen. Tanner got it. He understood feeling trapped in routines, wanting more excitement, needing to feel alive instead of just existing. When he walked me to my car and kissed me goodnight, it felt like waking up from a coma. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, a moment of weakness that didn't have to mean anything. But then Tanner texted me the next morning saying he'd had an amazing time. And when Timothy asked how my evening with the girls went, the lie came so easily I surprised myself. Oh, just the usual complaining about work and relationships. I said, and he nodded absently while scrolling through news on his tablet. The physical affair happened gradually over the next few weeks. Longer lunch breaks that turned into quick meetings at Tanner's apartment. Text conversations that became increasingly explicit. Stolen moments in empty conference rooms or his car after work. Each time, I told myself it would be the last time. But I was addicted to feeling desired and interesting and alive. Timothy never suspected anything, which honestly made it easier to justify he'd come home from work, ask how my day was while barely listening to the answer, eat dinner while reading emails on his phone, and spend the evening absorbed in whatever project currently held his attention. If he'd been more attentive, more present, maybe I would have felt guiltier about what I was doing. But it was like I was invisible in my own house. I started staying out later, testing how much I could get away with. Working late, drinks with coworkers, shopping with friends. Timothy accepted every explanation without question, and he'd just heat up leftovers for himself and continue with his evening routine like my absence didn't affect him at all. Part of me wanted him to get suspicious, to fight for me, to show some sign that he cared whether I was there or not. The night everything fell apart, I told Timothy I was having a girls' night out. Instead, Tanner and I had gone to this little jazz club across town, somewhere I'd never been with Timothy, somewhere that felt like it belonged to this exciting secret life I was building. We stayed until almost midnight, talking and laughing and feeling like the most interesting people in the room. When I got home, Timothy was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of him. not reading, not working, just sitting there like he'd been waiting. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I'd never felt from him before. "How was girls' night?" he asked. But there was something in his voice that made my stomach drop. "Oh, you know how it is," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart started racing. Just needed to blow off some steam. Timothy opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "Are you sleeping with someone else?" The question hit me like cold water. My first instinct was to lie, to act hurt and offended that he'd even suggest such a thing. What kind of question is that? Why would you even think something like that? But Timothy wasn't looking at me the way he usually did, with that patient, accommodating expression I'd grown so tired of. This was someone I'd never seen before, cold and certain and completely done with whatever game we'd been playing. "Because I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago," he said, and sliding some photographs across the table. "Because I've been watching you lie to my face for months. Because I already know the answer. And I'm giving you one chance to tell me the truth. The pictures were all there. Tanner and me at the wine bar, kissing in the parking lot, going into his apartment building, coming out hours later. My secret life laid out in black and white like evidence in a criminal trial. Timothy, I can explain him." I started, but he held up his hand. "Are you sleeping with someone else?" he repeated. I wanted to lie, to minimize, to find some way to make this not as bad as it looked. But the expression on his face told me that ship had already sailed. "Yes," I whispered. Timothy nodded like I'd just confirmed something he'd already accepted. "How long?" "It doesn't matter how long. It's not what you think. It's not serious. It doesn't mean anything." "How long?" "Haley. A few months." "But Timothy, please." "It was just a mistake." I was confused and lonely, and I never meant for it to happen. "It's over. I'll end it right now. We can work through this." Timothy pushed the divorce papers across the table. "I've already filed. You'll be served officially on Monday. But I wanted to give you the weekend to figure out your living situation." I stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "You can't be serious. People don't get divorced over one mistake. We can go to counseling. We can work this out. Couples survive affairs all the time." "I don't want to survive an affair," Timothy said, his voice completely steady. "I don't want to spend the next however many years wondering what you're really doing when you're not home. Checking your phone, trying to rebuild trust with someone who looked me in the eye and lied for months. I don't want to share you, and I don't want to fix this. I'm done." The finality in his voice scared me more than anything. This wasn't the Timothy I knew, the one who always wanted to talk things through, who never made impulsive decisions. "You're being ridiculous. You're throwing away 7 years over something that doesn't even matter. I love you." "Not him. You're my husband. You made a choice," Timothy said, standing up from the table. "Every time you lied to me, every time you met him, every time you came home and pretended everything was normal, those were choices. And now I'm making mine." I followed him upstairs, begging and pleading and promising anything I could think of. I offered to quit my job, to move somewhere else, to do whatever it took to prove I was serious about saving our marriage. I even suggested an open marriage, thinking maybe if I could make him understand that physical attraction didn't have to threaten what we had, we could find a way through this. Timothy just kept packing a suitcase with methodical precision, folding clothes and gathering toiletries like he was going on a business trip. "I'll be staying at a hotel until you find somewhere to go," he said. "The house isn't in your name, so you'll need to make arrangements quickly. Where am I supposed to go? This is my home too. You can't just kick me out because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown." Timothy stopped packing and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Haley, you destroyed our marriage. You lied to me for months. You betrayed every promise we made to each other. And your biggest concern right now is where you're going to live. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. That doesn't mean you get to ruin both our lives over it." But Timothy was already walking toward the door with his suitcase. "I'll be in touch through my lawyer. Don't contact me directly." He left me standing in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we'd built together, trying to process how everything had changed so quickly. Just that morning, I'd been a married woman living in my own house. Now I was facing divorce papers and homelessness because Timothy couldn't handle the fact that his wife was a human being with needs he'd been ignoring for years. The next few weeks were a nightmare of legal consultations and desperate phone calls. I tried reaching out to Timothy directly, sending emails asking if we could at least talk face to face, but he never responded. His lawyer handled everything with professional coldness, making it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. The worst part was that Tanner completely disappeared the moment he found out Timothy was actually filing for divorce. Suddenly, all those conversations about feeling alive and taking risks didn't seem so appealing when there were real consequences involved. "This is too much drama for me," he said when I called him crying after meeting with my lawyer. "I thought you guys were just having problems. Not that this would turn into some huge legal mess." So there I was, losing my husband and my lover in the same week, facing the reality of starting over at 28 with basically nothing to show for 7 years of marriage. During the mediation process, I learned exactly how little I was entitled to. The house was in Timothy's name, bought before we met. The car he'd given me was worth about $4,800. No spousal support since the marriage was less than 10 years, and I had my own income. I ended up renting a basement room from Janet, a coworker who felt sorry for me. 40-year-old divorcee living next to a washing machine that sounds like it's trying to achieve flight every time Janet does laundry. The room smells perpetually of fabric softener and cat litter, and I can hear every footstep, every television program, every phone conversation happening in the house above me. My friends and family were sympathetic at first, but after a few months of listening to me analyze every detail of the marriage and divorce, they started getting tired of the topic. My mother actually told me last month that maybe I should focus on personal growth instead of dwelling on the past. Easy for her to say. She's been married to my father for 30 years and has never had to start over from scratch in a basement. Work became my escape, the only place where I felt competent and valued. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for overtime, pursued every promotion opportunity that came up, but even career success felt hollow when I had no one to share it with. No one who cared whether I'd had a good day or a terrible one. I tried dating apps for a while, but explaining why a 28-year-old was living in someone's basement and going through a bitter divorce wasn't exactly attractive to potential partners. The few men who weren't scared off by my situation turned out to be looking for easy hookups rather than anything serious. And I realized I wasn't ready for either category. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sent Timothy one last email. Just a simple question. "Are you really never going to speak to me again?" I'd hoped that enough time had passed for him to soften a little, maybe even miss some of the good parts of our relationship. But there was no response. Just like all the other times I'd tried to reach out, my therapist Sharon keeps pushing me to take accountability for my choices, to stop focusing on Timothy's reaction and start examining my own behavior. She's kind but brutally honest, which I appreciate, even when it's uncomfortable. "You keep talking about what Timothy should have done differently," she said during our last session. "But what about what you could have done differently?" I know I was selfish. I know I handled things badly, but it's frustrating that everyone expects me to carry all the blame for a marriage that was already broken. Yes, I had an affair, but Timothy's complete unwillingness to fight for our relationship, his immediate jump to divorce, his cold refusal to even consider counseling. That says something about his commitment, too. Doesn't it? 14 months after our divorce was finalized, I saw Timothy at a Mexican restaurant downtown. I was there with some coworkers, celebrating someone's promotion, when I spotted him across the room. He was with a woman I'd never seen before, pretty and classy looking in a light pink sundress, her hair pinned back neatly. They were sharing an appetizer and laughing about something. Completely absorbed in their conversation, Timothy looked good. Better than good. Actually, he seemed relaxed and happy in a way I'd never seen during our marriage, like someone had lifted a weight off his shoulders. When he noticed me looking, he gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, polite but completely indifferent. Like I was an old coworker he barely remembered. That moment hit me harder than I expected. Seeing him moved on, obviously in love with someone new, while I was still living in Janet's basement and analyzing our relationship in therapy sessions. He'd rebuilt his entire life while I was still stuck in the wreckage of our marriage. Trying to understand what went wrong, I left the restaurant early, telling my coworkers I had a headache, driving home to my basement room. I couldn't stop thinking about how happy Timothy looked, how easily he'd replaced me, how completely he'd erased 7 years of shared history. Part of me wanted to hate him for it. But mostly I just felt exhausted by the whole thing. Sharon says healing isn't linear, that setbacks like seeing Timothy with someone new are normal parts of the process. She keeps encouraging me to focus on building my own new life instead of measuring my progress against his. You can't control his choices, she reminds me. You can only control your own. I know she's right, logically, but it's hard to move forward when you're living in someone's basement next to a washing machine, working jobs that feel meaningless, going home to an empty room every night. Timothy got to keep the house, the life we built, the respect of our mutual friends. He got to be the victim while I became the villain who destroyed a good marriage for meaningless sex with a coworker who disappeared the moment things got complicated. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just talked to Timothy about feeling restless instead of looking for excitement somewhere else. Maybe we could have worked on our problems together, found ways to bring more spontaneity and passion into our relationship. Maybe he would have been willing to change if he'd known how unhappy I was. But then I remember how checked out he seemed during those last months, how little effort he put into connecting with me, how satisfied he appeared with our boring routine. Would he really have been willing to work on things? Or would he have just given me the same patient, accommodating responses that made me feel invisible? I'll never know, because I didn't give him the chance to surprise me. Instead, I chose the path that guaranteed maximum damage to everyone involved. I lost my marriage, my home, my financial security, and my self-respect. Timothy lost his trust in relationships and had to rebuild his life from scratch. Even Tanner got dragged into drama he never signed up for. The hardest part is accepting that this is my new reality. No magical reconciliation. No sudden realization that we're meant to be together. No Hollywood ending where love conquers all. Just me, approaching 30, starting over in ways I never imagined I'd have to, learning to live alone, to make decisions without consulting anyone, to find meaning and purpose that doesn't depend on being someone's wife. Some days I feel hopeful about the future, excited about possibilities I haven't considered yet. Other days I feel like I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me for a few months of feeling special and desired. Most days I just feel tired, worn out from trying to rebuild a life that feels authentic and worthwhile. Sharon keeps reminding me that growth comes from discomfort, that this painful period is necessary for becoming whoever I'm supposed to be next. You can't go back. She says, but you can go forward, and you get to choose what that looks like. I'm trying to believe her, trying to focus on the opportunities instead of the losses. But sitting in this basement room at night, listening to Janet's cats fight and her washing machine rumble, it's hard to feel optimistic about what comes next. All I know for certain is that I can't keep living in the past, analyzing every decision and wondering about different outcomes. Timothy has clearly moved on, built something new and beautiful with someone who probably appreciates what he has to offer. Maybe someday I'll be able to do the same. Find someone who sees value in who I am now instead of who I used to be. Until then, I'm just taking it one day at a time, trying to learn from my mistakes without drowning in regret over choices I can never undo.